I spent $30,000 on a luxury family vacation, only for my son to tell me at the departure gate, "Go home, Dad." 6 hours later, that one disrespectful sentence left them stranded on an island with no hotel, no money, and no return flight. This is a story about how quickly paradise turns into a nightmare when you betray the man paying the bill. Before I reveal the secret move I made to ruin their trip, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And please subscribe if you believe that you should never bite the hand that feeds you. The air in the terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson was thick with the sterile hum of recycled air and the low rumble of rolling suitcases. It was a sound of departures, of new beginnings. I stood beside a mountain of brand new luggage, the scent of fresh leather still clinging to the Louis Vuitton handles. My son, Andre, insisted on it. "We need to travel in style, Pop," he had said with a wide, bright smile. I had paid for it all, of course. Just like I had paid for the first-class tickets, the 5-star resort in Maui, the entire $30,000 experience. It was after all my treat, my gift to the family. Jasmine, my daughter-in-law, was fluttering around the kids, her voice a little too high, a little too cheerful. She adjusted our grandson Malik's collar for the 3rd time, a gesture meant to look motherly but came across as pure nervous energy. Andre was not looking at any of us. His gaze was fixed on the departure screen, his foot tapping a rapid, anxious rhythm against the polished floor. I was the only one standing perfectly still, a small island of calm in their ocean of agitated excitement. I watched them, my son and his wife, and felt the familiar ache of a distance that had nothing to do with miles. They were right here, but they had been gone for a long, long time. We finally reached the front of the priority access line. The check-in agent, a young woman with a professional but weary smile, took our passports. She tapped at her keyboard, her eyes scanning the screen. She handed passports back to Andre, Jasmine, and the children. Then she looked at me, her smile faltering for just a second. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice polite but firm. "I have your passport here, but I cannot find a reservation for you on this flight." The words did not seem to make sense. They floated in the air between us, meaningless sounds against the backdrop of airport noise. I felt a dozen pairs of eyes from the line behind us. I turned to Andre, a simple question on my face. His own face, the one I had watched grow from a boy's to a man's, was a blank wall. He would not meet my eyes. He was suddenly fascinated by a loose thread on his jacket sleeve. "Andre," I said, my voice quiet, but it cut through the noise like a blade. Jasmine was the first to react, a sharp, theatrical gasp. "Oh my goodness," she breathed, placing a hand over her heart. There must be some mistake. But there was no mistake. I could see it in the way my son's shoulders tensed, the way he refused to look at me. The truth was standing right there in front of me, uglier than any lie he could have told. "Dad," Andre finally mumbled, still staring at that imaginary thread. "God, I am so sorry. Things have been just insane at work, with the kids, and getting everything packed." He finally looked up, and his eyes were filled with a shallow, rehearsed apology. "I think in all the chaos, I just forgot to book your ticket." The excuse was so flimsy, so insulting, it barely stood up. $30,000, and he forgot. Jasmine immediately jumped into her role as the supportive wife. "Oh honey, do not worry," she said, pulling out her phone with a flourish. "Let us see if we can buy a last-minute ticket right now. It cannot be that much, can it?" Her fingers danced across the screen. I watched her, a seasoned actress playing a part she knew well. Her face fell into a mask of deep disappointment. "Oh, Isaiah," she said, turning the phone towards me as if to prove her point. "A last-minute seat is almost $3,000, and it would not even be near us. That is just criminal." They stood there, a united front of feigned regret. He, the forgetful son; she, the helpless fixer. They had practiced this. The thought was as cold and hard as the marble floor beneath my feet. This was not a mistake. This was a performance. Andre took a step toward me, placing a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy, not with affection, but with the weight of his dismissal. "Look, Dad," he said, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial whisper, as if we were a team solving a problem. "The flight is going to start boarding any minute. There is nothing we can do right now." He squeezed my shoulder. "Why do you not just grab a cab and head home? Get some rest. We feel terrible, truly. We will bring you back the best souvenir from the island. Go home." The words echoed in the sudden silence of my mind. He was sending me away like a child who had misbehaved, like an inconvenience that needed to be tidied up. I looked past him, at my grandchildren Malik and Tiana, who were watching with confused eyes. I looked at the new luggage I had paid for. I looked at the life I had given my son, the opportunities, the support, the unending financial safety net, and in return, he gave me 2 words: go home. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I did not give them the drama they might have expected. I simply looked at my son, held his gaze for a long moment, and saw a stranger. I gave a slow, deliberate nod. "All right, son," I said, my voice perfectly even. "You all have a safe flight." I turned around and walked away, without looking back. I could feel their collective sigh of relief at my back. They thought they had won. They thought they were rid of me. But as I walked toward the exit, my steps were not the shuffle of a defeated old man. They were the measured, steady steps of a craftsman about to go to work. The city slid past the taxi window, in a blur of brick and glass, familiar streets looking strange and distant. I caught my reflection in the window, layered over the moving landscape. For a moment, I saw a stranger, a tired old man with the airport's harsh light still etched around his eyes. But the feeling passed. The man looking back at me was not tired. He was awake. He was seeing things with a clarity that was as sharp and painful as a shard of broken glass. Go home. The words were not an echo of my son's voice anymore. They had become my own command, a mission statement. The sharp, hot sting of betrayal had faded during my silent walk out of the terminal. It was replaced by something cold and heavy, something solid. It was the feeling of a tool settling into a craftsman's hand. This was not the messy, emotional pain of a family squabble. This was the clean, simple geometry of a problem that needed to be solved. They had made a critical miscalculation. They saw an old man, a wallet, a relic to be managed and appeased. They had forgotten they were speaking to the man who built the house they grew up in, brick by brick. They thought they were playing a game against a pawn they could sacrifice. They had no idea they were sitting across the board from the king, and they had just sent him back to his castle. The taxi turned onto my street, and I felt no sadness, no self-pity. I felt a quiet, simmering focus. I was not a victim going home to lick his wounds. I was a strategist, returning to headquarters. The house was silent, holding its breath in the late morning light. Everything was just as I had left it an hour ago, yet the space felt entirely different. It was the same 4 walls, the same furniture I had built, the same photos of a smiling family on the mantel, but the emptiness was new. It was a hollow space, carved out by a betrayal I had not seen coming. I walked into the living room and sat down in the armchair by the window, the one with the floral print that had faded from years of sunlight. Her chair, Betty's chair, and in the quiet, I could almost hear her voice, not with sadness, but with the calm, knowing wisdom she always had. Betty saw the world with an artist's eye. For detail, she noticed the fine cracks in things before they became breaks. Years ago, after Andre had asked for a significant loan for a car he did not need, she had sat with me on the porch, watching him drive away. "He has your hands, Isaiah," she had said, her gaze distant, "but he does not have your patience for the wood. He only wants the finished table." I did not fully understand it then. I thought it was just a mother's worry. Now, sitting in her chair, her words were as clear as a bell. She also used to say, "Money does not change a person, Isaiah. It just makes them more of who they already are." And in my grief after she was gone, I had forgotten that. I had mistaken my generosity for love, when in reality, it was just fuel for my son's weakness, for the entitled man he was becoming. The ache in my chest was not just for me, it was for her, for the legacy of hard work and quiet dignity we had built together. This was not about a missed flight anymore. This was about the foundation of our life's work, and I would not stand by and watch my son tear it down for a pocketful of ashes. I stood up from her chair, the warmth of the sun on my back. The path forward was no longer foggy with hurt. It was a straight, clear line. I walked into my study, the one room in the house that was more mine than ours. The walls were lined with books on woodworking and history, and the air smelled of sawdust and old paper. The desk, a solid piece of dark oak, was the first thing I ever built for this house. I built it to last. I ran my hand over its smooth, cool surface, feeling the grain of the wood under my palm. This was a desk for making decisions. I did not need to look up a number. I knew it by heart. I picked up the receiver of the heavy old-fashioned telephone on my desk and dialed. It rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. Law offices of Julian Graves. Julian, I said, my voice steady. It is Isaiah Vance. There was a brief pause, then his tone warmed slightly. Mr. Vance, it is good to hear from you, though I get the feeling this is not a social call. Is everything all right? I got straight to the point. I need you to take immediate action on a sensitive matter, Julian. I want you to draft the necessary legal documents to temporarily freeze all access to the Vance family trust for my son, Andre Vance. Effective immediately. I could hear the faint sound of typing on the other end of the line. Understood, he said. What is the reason for the review? A fundamental reassessment of the trust's terms and beneficiaries, I said, the words feeling solid and true. That will suffice for now. Of course, Julian replied. I will have the documents drafted and filed within the hour. When would you like me to send the official notification to Andre? This was the crucial part. This was the move that mattered. I want the notification sent to his primary email address in the next 5 minutes, I said. He is currently on a flight to Hawaii. He will be in the air, unreachable, for the next 6 hours. I want that email to be the first thing he sees when he lands and turns on his phone. Consider it done, Mr. Vance, he said, his voice leaving no room for doubt. Thank you, Julian, I replied, and gently placed the receiver back in its cradle. I sat there at the desk I had built, in the house I had paid for, and imagined an email, a silent little digital messenger, beginning its journey across the country. It was the first brick I would lay in the new foundation of my life. As I sat at my desk, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway was the only sound. It was a rhythm I knew well, a steady heartbeat for a house whose own heart had been ripped out when Betty died. The plan I had set in motion was not born from a single moment of disrespect at an airport. It was forged over years of smaller betrayals, 1,000 tiny cracks in the foundation of my trust. The memories, the ones I had pushed aside, were now returning with perfect, painful clarity. The next morning, I put on the charcoal suit Betty always said made me look distinguished. I gathered my bank statements, printed out a few key emails, and placed them in an old leather briefcase she had bought me for our 10th anniversary. It was a briefcase that had carried contracts for honest work, for buildings that still stood strong against the wind. Now, it carried the evidence of a foundation that was crumbling. Julian Graves' office was on the 34th floor of a downtown skyscraper, a world of glass and steel that hummed with quiet ambition. He was a young man, sharp and impeccably dressed, but his eyes held a calm, old-soul intelligence that I trusted. He greeted me with a firm handshake, no pity in his grip, just respect. He listened without interruption as I laid it all out on his polished mahogany desk. I did not present it as a grieving father's tale of woe. I presented it as a case. I spoke of the incident with the watches, establishing a baseline of entitlement. I laid out the financial statements showing the $50,000 transfer to cover Jasmine's business debts. I placed a printed photo I had found on her social media page next to it, a picture of her smiling with the new designer handbag, posted 3 days after the bailout. Julian looked at the photo, then back at me, his expression unreadable. I walked him through Andre's recent persistent questions about the trust. I recounted them word for word. Finally, I told him about the airport. My voice never wavered. I was not there for sympathy. I was there for a craftsman's advice on a structure that was failing. When I finished, I folded my hands on top of my briefcase. I am not here today out of anger, Julian, I said, my voice low and steady. I am here because the foundation is cracked. The load-bearing walls of respect and trust have been compromised. Before the whole house comes down, I need to know my options for reinforcing the structure. Julian leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against a legal pad. Mr. Vance, he said slowly, from what you have shown me, this is not just a cracked foundation. This is a pattern of consistent, deliberate financial and emotional exploitation. Reinforcements might not be enough. I had expected him to nod and start talking about legal clauses, about adding amendments and stipulations to the trust. Instead, Julian Graves put down his pen and laced his fingers together, his gaze direct and serious. Mr. Vance, he began, leaning forward slightly. Let us speak plainly. You came in here talking about reinforcing a cracked foundation, but what a good builder does, and you know this better than I do, is determine the cause of the crack. And from what you have told me, this is not a crack caused by time or pressure. This is a crack caused by poison being mixed into the concrete from the start. We spent the next 2 hours going through the last 5 years of transactions. It was a surgical procedure. We were cutting away the skin of family loyalty to see the rot beneath. Julian pointed to a recurring charge. Private school tuition for Malik and Tiana, $20,000 a year. I nodded. I agreed to pay half, I said. Julian slid a paper across the desk. Look closer, Isaiah. You are paying all of it. And here. He pointed to a series of withdrawals marked as home repairs. $4,000 here, $6,000 there. Did you authorize these? I looked at the dates. I was in the hospital for my hip surgery during 2 of them. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. No, I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. I did not. Julian pulled up a digital copy of the withdrawal slip on his monitor. He zoomed in on the signature line. There it was, my name. But the loop on the V was wrong. The slant was too aggressive. It was a good copy, but it was a copy. That is not my hand, I whispered. That is Andre's. The room seemed to get colder. This was no longer just about a spoiled son or an ungrateful daughter-in-law. This was fraud. This was theft. My son had not just been mooching off me. He had been stealing from me while I lay in a hospital bed recovering from surgery. Julian took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Isaiah, he said softly, we are crossing a line here. This is criminal. If we pursue this, there is no going back. It changes everything. It is not just a civil dispute anymore. It is a felony. I looked out the window at the sprawling city below. So many buildings, so many lives, all built on foundations of one kind or another. I thought of Andre at the airport, dismissing me with a pat on the shoulder. I thought of the fake smile on Jasmine's face as she talked about ticket prices. They had crossed the line long ago. I was just finally looking at it. Do what you have to do, Julian, I said. The time for half measures is over. The time for deliberation was over. Let us do it, I said. I want you to begin the legal process of completely dissolving the Vance family trust. The audit is finished. Now we move to enforcement. 6 hours and 4,000 miles away, Paradise was performing exactly as advertised. The air that greeted Andre and Jasmine as they stepped out of the air-conditioned airport was a warm, fragrant blanket scented with salt and flowers. The resort lobby was even better. It was an open-air cathedral of wealth, with a soaring ceiling, lush green plants cascading down the walls, and a gentle breeze carrying the sound of a distant ukulele. They were handed cool, damp towels and glasses of pineapple juice. Jasmine let out a little sigh of pure, unadulterated pleasure. This is it, honey, she whispered to Andre, squeezing his arm. This is how life is supposed to be. Andre, feeling expansive and successful, surveyed the scene like a king viewing his new domain. He had done it. He had pulled it off. He slipped his phone out of his pocket, ready to post the first picture to social media, a casual shot of the infinity pool with a caption about finally getting some much-needed relaxation. As the phone connected to the resort's Wi-Fi, a cascade of notifications flooded the screen. Buried among them was an email with a subject line that made his stomach clench. It was from the law offices of Julian Graves. At the gleaming marble check-in desk, the concierge, a beautiful woman with a flower in her hair, gave them a dazzling smile. Aloha and welcome to Paradise, Mr. and Mrs. Vance. We just need a credit card for incidentals and the resort fee. Andre, still trying to process the legalistic jargon in the email preview on his phone, handed over the black platinum card with a confident flourish. It was the card linked to the trust, the one with a practically unlimited ceiling. The concierge swiped it. A small, polite frown touched her lips. She swiped it again. I am so sorry, sir, she said, her smile tightening just a fraction. It seems this card has been declined. Andre stared at the word on the screen. Declined. It was an alien concept to him, a word from a different language meant for other people. He snatched the card back from the concierge, his face flushing a deep red. Run it again, he snapped. There must be a problem with your machine. The concierge, her professional smile, now welded in place, ran it again. Declined. I was not there to see it, of course. But sitting in the quiet of my study, I could picture the scene as clearly as if I were sitting in one of those overpriced lobby armchairs. I could see the panic begin to bloom in my son's eyes, the way his confidence shattered like cheap glass. I could see Jasmine grabbing his arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his sleeve, her voice a venomous whisper in his ear. "Try the other one, Andre," she hissed. "The gold card." Andre fumbled in his wallet, his fingers suddenly clumsy. He pulled out the gold card, the backup tied to the joint savings account. He handed it over. The concierge swiped it. The silence that followed was louder than the crashing waves outside. "Declined." "Sir," the concierge said, her voice dropping to a discreet whisper that somehow felt like a shout. "The system is showing that the issuer has placed a hold on all accounts associated with this profile. Perhaps you have another form of payment." The line behind them was growing. People were starting to stare. A man in a linen suit checked his watch and let out an impatient sigh. Andre felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on his neck. He looked at Jasmine. She was pale, her eyes wide, with a mixture of terror and fury. "Give them your card," Andre whispered. Jasmine shook her head. "That is my personal account," she hissed back. "It barely has 2,000 in it. We need that for emergencies." "This is an emergency," Andre hissed back. The concierge cleared her throat. "Sir, if you cannot provide a valid method of payment, I am afraid we cannot check you in." The manager, a tall man with a serious face, began to walk toward the desk, sensing the disturbance. The humiliation was total. It was a physical weight crushing the air out of Andre's lungs. "Fine," Jasmine snapped. She threw her personal debit card onto the marble counter. "Just take this." The concierge took it and ran it. It was approved. But then she looked at the screen and paused. "I apologize, Mrs. Vance," she said, "but this card does not have sufficient funds to cover the deposit for the Ocean View Suite for 7 nights. We would need to downgrade your reservation significantly." Andre looked at the manager standing nearby, then back at his wife. "Just do it," he mumbled, staring at the floor. The concierge typed rapidly. "We have availability at our sister property across the highway. It is a standard room, garden view, no balcony." It was a nice way of saying they were being kicked out of the palace. They gathered their luggage, the Louis Vuitton bags suddenly looking ridiculous in their hands. They walked past the line of staring guests, past the infinity pool they would not be swimming in, and out the front doors. They were exiled from the garden before they even took a bite of the apple. They waited for a taxi on the curb, the humidity suddenly feeling oppressive and heavy. Andre looked at his phone again. He opened the email from Julian Graves. Notice of trust, dissolution, and asset freeze. The words were black and stark against the white screen. He looked at Jasmine, who was furiously typing on her own phone, probably venting to a friend or deleting posts. He looked at his children, who were hot, tired, and confused. "We are going to fix this," Andre said, his voice trembling, but he was not speaking to them. He was speaking to the fear that was slowly wrapping its cold hands around his throat. The Sunset Breeze Motel was named with a sense of irony that bordered on cruel. It sat huddled against the side of the highway in Kihei, a low stucco building painted a peeling shade of salmon pink. There was no ocean breeze here, only the hot exhaust of passing trucks and the humid stillness of a parking lot baking in the afternoon sun. The taxi driver had dumped their luggage on the curb with a look of pity that stung worse than the heat. Andre stood there, surrounded by the mountain of designer bags, looking like a deposed prince standing in the ruins of his kingdom. The neon sign above the office flickered with a buzzing sound. The letter E burnt out, so it read Sunset Breeze. Inside the room was a masterclass in despair. It smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial-strength lemon cleaner, a chemical attempt to mask years of bad decisions. There were 2 double beds pushed too close together, covered in thin polyester spreads that had seen too many tourists. Jasmine stood in the center of the room, refusing to sit down. She looked at the stained carpet, then at the single tiny window that looked out onto a dumpster. She looked at Andre. "This is a joke, right?" she said, her voice trembling with a rage she was barely containing. "Tell me this is a joke, Andre. Tell me we are not staying here." Andre rubbed his face with his hands, feeling the grit of travel and stress on his skin. "It is just for tonight, Jas," he pleaded. "Just until I get a hold of Dad. There is obviously a mix-up with the bank. I will sort it out in the morning." "A mix-up?" She laughed, a shrill sound that made the kids jump. "You think freezing every single account we have is a mix-up? You think being humiliated in front of the entire resort was a clerical error?" She kicked one of the Louis Vuitton bags, sending it skidding across the cheap carpet. "Your father did this, Andre. He did this to us. The air conditioner in the window rattled to life with a sound like a dying engine spitting out lukewarm air that smelled of mildew. Malik and Tiana were sitting on the edge of one of the beds, looking small and frightened. They had never seen their parents like this. They had never seen the facade crack. Andre felt a surge of panic rising in his chest, a cold tide threatening to drown him. He needed to fix this. He was the man who always fixed things, usually by making a phone call to the man who actually paid for things. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over Isaiah's contact. He dialed. He put the phone to his ear, pacing the 3 feet of available floor space between the beds and the dresser. It rang, and rang, and rang. Then the voicemail clicked on. "Hey, this is Isaiah. Leave a message." Andre hung up. He dialed again immediately. "Pick up," he muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. "Pick up the phone, Dad." 4,000 miles away in Atlanta, the only sound was the rhythmic rasp of sandpaper on wood. I was in my workshop, the converted garage that smelled of cedar and memories. I was working on an old cherrywood end table, stripping away years of grime and scratches to reveal the beautiful grain underneath. It was slow work. It was honest work. On the workbench beside me, my phone began to buzz. It vibrated against the hard wood, a frantic, angry sound that disrupted the peace of the room. I glanced at the screen. Andre. I did not reach for it. I did not wipe the sawdust from my hands. I simply watched the name flash on the screen until the screen went dark. A moment later, it lit up again. Andre. Then again. Jasmine. Then Andre again. It was a digital tantrum, a remote control panic attack being beamed across the ocean. I went back to sanding. With every stroke of the paper, I felt a little lighter. For years, I had been trained like a dog to answer that ring. Every time my phone buzzed, it meant a problem I had to solve, a bill I had to pay, a crisis I had to manage. It meant Andre needed bail money for a parking ticket. It meant Jasmine needed a deposit for a venue. It meant my peace was being held hostage by their chaos. But today the phone rang and I felt nothing. I felt the profound liberation of being unavailable. I was not their banker today. I was not their safety net. I was just a man sanding a table. The buzzing stopped for a moment, then the chime of text messages began. They arrived in a rapid staccato burst. I picked up the phone and wiped the screen with my thumb. The first text was from Andre. "Dad, call me as soon as possible. Emergency." The second one came a minute later. "Banks are frozen. Card declined. We are stuck. Call the bank now." The tone was demanding, the reflex of a man who believes the world exists to serve him. I scrolled down. The next text was from Jasmine. "This is not funny, Charles. The kids are scared. Fix this." I read the words and felt a cold distance. They were not asking if I was okay. They were not asking why I had not been on the flight. They were not worried that perhaps I had had a heart attack or a stroke. Their only concern was the flow of money. The tap had been turned off and they were thirsty. 10 minutes later, the tone shifted. Desperation was setting in. Andre again. "Dad, please. We are at a motel. It is awful. Why are you doing this?" And then finally the mask slipped completely. The last text from Jasmine was a paragraph of pure venom. "You are a cruel, selfish old man. How dare you strand us like this? You are ruining our vacation. You are ruining everything. I will never forgive you for this." I looked at the words glowing on the screen. Selfish, cruel, ruining. They were projecting their own reflection onto me. I set the phone back down on the bench face down. I picked up the sandpaper. I was not ruining their lives. I was introducing them to reality. And reality, I had learned long ago, is a teacher that does not accept excuses. Back in the motel room, the silence stretched tight as a drum skin. Andre threw his phone onto the bed. "He is not answering," he said, his voice hollow. Jasmine sat down on the lumpy mattress, covering her face with her hands. She began to sob, great heaving sobs of frustration and self-pity. "What are we going to do, Andre?" she wailed. "We cannot stay here for a week. We do not have any money for food. We do not have a rental car. We are trapped." Andre walked to the window and pulled back the dusty curtain. He looked out at the dumpster and the parking lot beyond. He saw a stray cat picking through a discarded takeout container. He felt a kinship with the animal. He had always thought of himself as a success, a man of status, but standing there in that cheap room with his declined credit cards and his crying wife, he realized he was nothing. He was a hollow shell painted with gold paint, and the paint was beginning to flake off. He turned back to the room. "We will go home," he said quietly. Jasmine looked up, her mascara running down her cheeks. "What?" she asked. "We go home," Andre repeated, his voice hardening. "We get the first flight out tomorrow morning. We go back to Atlanta. And we go to the house. I am going to look my father in the eye, and I am going to demand an explanation. He cannot just do this. He cannot just cut us off. He is senile, or he is crazy, but either way I am going to fix it." He grabbed his laptop from his bag. "I am going to book the flights," he said. "Use your card, Jas. We will pay yourself back from the trust once I get power of attorney." He opened the laptop, the blue light illuminating his desperate face. He was already plotting his counterattack. He did not understand that the war was already over. He did not understand that he was not marching home to a victory. He was marching home to a sentencing. While my son was plotting his revenge in a cheap motel room 4,000 miles away, I was sitting in a small coffee shop near the university campus. The air smelled of burnt espresso and rain, a stark contrast to the stale cigarette smoke I imagined Andre was breathing. I was sitting at a corner table by the window, watching the students rush by outside. They moved with the frantic energy of youth, their backpacks heavy with books and their heads full of dreams. I was waiting for Kendra, my niece. She was the daughter of my late sister, a quiet girl, who had inherited her mother's soft eyes and my father's stubborn chin. She walked in a few minutes later, shaking a wet umbrella and looking around the crowded room with an anxious expression. When she saw me, her face lit up with a genuine smile that reached all the way to her eyes. She looked tired. That was the first thing I noticed. There were dark purple circles under her eyes, and her hair was pulled back in a messy bun that spoke of late nights and early mornings. She was wearing a faded denim jacket and carrying a drafting tube that looked like it had seen better days. She maneuvered through the tables with a careful grace, clutching her bag close to her side. I stood up to hug her. She felt thin in my arms, fragile but vibrating with a nervous energy. "I am so sorry I am late, Uncle Isaiah," she said, pulling back and checking her cheap plastic watch. The bus was running behind schedule, and then I had to run back to the studio to grab my portfolio. I waved away her apology. "You are not late, Kendra," I said. "I have nowhere else to be. Sit down." She sat, exhaling a long breath as if she had been holding it all day. I asked her if she wanted anything. She glanced at the menu board above the counter, her eyes scanning the prices before settling on the cheapest item. "Just a small black coffee for me, thanks," she said. I nodded and walked to the counter. I ordered a large latte with hazelnut the way she used to like it when she was a kid, and a turkey club sandwich with extra avocado. When I set the food down in front of her, she looked at it with wide eyes. "Uncle Isaiah, I cannot let you buy me lunch," she protested, her hand hovering over the plate. "I am not that hungry, really." "Eat," I said gently. "You look like you have not had a real meal in 2 days." She hesitated for a second longer, then picked up half the sandwich. She ate with a focused intensity that told me I was right. She was starving. As she ate, I watched her. She was working 2 jobs to put herself through the architecture program. She waited tables at a diner on the weekends and shelved books at the library in the evenings. She never asked me for a dime, not once. When she finished the first half of the sandwich, she wiped her mouth with a napkin and looked at me with a shy smile. "Thank you," she said softly. "That was amazing." I pointed to the black plastic tube resting against her chair. "Show me what you are working on," I said. She perked up immediately. She cleared the plates away and uncapped the tube, sliding out a roll of large paper sheets. She spread them out on the small table, weighing down the corners with the salt shaker and her coffee cup. It was a design for a community housing project in the West End. I leaned in, studying the lines. It was not a flashy glass tower or a modern art museum. It was a series of low-rise brick buildings centered around a communal courtyard. There were gardens. There were covered walkways. There was a dedicated space for a medical clinic on the ground floor. "This is for the senior design competition," she explained, her voice gaining strength and confidence. The prompt was to create a space that fosters connection. I realized that a lot of the elderly people in that neighborhood are isolated. They are stuck in apartments with no elevators and no community. So, I designed this. All the units are accessible. The materials are sustainable, locally sourced brick and timber. It is meant to feel like a home, not a facility. I ran my finger along the elevation drawing. The lines were clean and confident. She had thought of everything. The way the light would hit the courtyard in the afternoon, the airflow through the corridors. It was practical, but it was also beautiful. It had soul. I looked at her hands as she pointed out the details. They were stained with graphite and ink. Her fingernails were short and unpolished. They were working hands. They were hands that knew the difference between drawing a line and building a wall. I looked at her face, and for a moment I saw Betty. It was in the passion, the way she cared about the people who would live inside the walls she was drawing. "That is good work, Kendra," I said quietly. She flushed with pleasure. "Coming from you, that means a lot," she said. "I know you built half the houses on the south side. I am just trying to live up to the family standard." The family standard. The word struck a chord in my chest. She thought the standard was about quality construction. She did not know that her cousin Andre thought the family standard was flying first class and staying in 5-star resorts. I looked at this girl who was scraping by on student loans and tips, who was designing homes for the poor while sleeping 4 hours a night. And then I thought of my son, who had screamed at me because he could not buy a $3,000 ticket on a whim. The contrast was so sharp it almost cut me. Andre wanted the fruit of the tree, but he despised the roots. Kendra was down in the dirt watering the soil, and she did not even know if she would ever get to taste the fruit. I sat back in my chair, a feeling of clarity washing over me. I had been looking for a successor in the wrong place. I had been looking at bloodlines when I should have been looking at blueprints. Kendra rolled up the drawings, her movements careful and respectful of the paper. "I have to get back to the studio," she said, capping the tube. "I have a critique at 4. She stood up, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "Thank you again for the lunch, Uncle Isaiah. It really saved me today." I stood up and took her hand. It was rough and warm. "Kendra," I said, looking her in the eye, "keep your schedule clear for a few days next week." She looked confused. "Why?" she asked. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is going to be fine," I said. "I just might have a project I want you to look at, something a little bigger than a school assignment." She smiled, unsure if I was serious or just being a supportive uncle. "Okay," she said. "I will." I watched her walk out of the coffee shop, stepping back into the rain with her head held high. She had no money. She had no car. But she had something my son would never have. She had a purpose. I sat back down and finished my coffee. It was cold, but it tasted better than any champagne I could have ordered in Hawaii. I took out my phone and sent a text to Julian Graves. The text was short. "Prepare the new incorporation papers. I have found the director." Then I stood up, buttoned my coat, and walked out into the rain, ready to face the storm that was coming home to meet me. 4,000 miles away, the sun had finally gone down over Kihei, but the heat remained. It hung heavy and thick on the narrow concrete balcony of the Sunset Breeze Motel, a suffocating blanket that smelled of exhaust fumes and damp stucco. Andre sat on a rusted plastic chair, his elbows on his knees, staring at the dark asphalt of the parking lot below. In his hand was a plastic cup filled with warm, cheap vodka he had bought from the liquor store next to the gas station. It was a far cry from the aged scotch he usually drank. But tonight he was not drinking for pleasure. He was drinking to numb the panic that was clawing at the back of his throat. Jasmine stood leaning against the railing, the orange glow of the streetlights casting long, sharp shadows across her face. She was still wearing the linen pants she had traveled in, now wrinkled and stained with sweat. She was scrolling through her phone, her thumb moving with a manic, repetitive rhythm. She was not looking at social media anymore. She was looking at legal statutes. She turned to Andre, her eyes hard and bright in the darkness. "He is doing this on purpose, Andre," she said, her voice low and tight. "I have been thinking about it for the last hour. This is not a bank error. And this is not just him being petty about a plane ticket. He planned this." Andre took a long swallow of the burning liquid. "I know," he mumbled. "I know he did. He is trying to teach us a lesson. He thinks he can just ground us like we are teenagers. He thinks if he cuts off the money we will come crawling back and apologize." Jasmine shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "It is worse than that. He is not just teaching a lesson. He is unstable." Andre looked up at her. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "Think about it, Andre," she said, stepping closer to him. "He forgets his ticket. He freezes the accounts without warning. He strands his own grandchildren in a foreign place with no resources. These are not the actions of a rational man. These are the actions of someone who is losing his grip." She let the words hang in the hot night air. Losing his grip. It was a lifeline, a narrative that could turn their humiliation into a strategy. Andre sat up straighter. "You think he is senile?" he asked. "I think he is showing signs of rapid cognitive decline," Jasmine said, the words sounding practiced and smooth. "And if he is not capable of managing his own affairs, then it is our duty as his family to step in, to protect him, and to protect the estate." She pulled up a web page on her phone and shoved it toward him. "Emergency conservatorship," she read. "In cases where an individual poses an immediate threat to their own financial assets or well-being, the court can grant temporary control to a next of kin." Andre looked at the glowing screen. It was a seductive idea. If his father was just mean, then Andre was a victim. But if his father was sick, then Andre was a hero. He was the responsible son stepping up to save the family legacy from a confused old man. It washed away the guilt. It justified everything. "We could file the petition as soon as we land," Andre said, the gears in his mind beginning to turn. "We just need proof. We need to show the judge that his behavior is erratic." Jasmine nodded. "We create the proof," she said. She opened the camera app on her phone and switched it to video mode. She fluffed her hair, making it look even more disheveled. She rubbed her eyes until they looked red and tired. "Come here," she commanded. "Sit next to me. Look worried." Andre moved his chair next to hers. He leaned in, putting on the face he used when he had to deliver bad news to a client, a face of grave concern. Jasmine hit the record button. "Hey everyone," she whispered to the camera, her voice trembling with fake emotion. We are at a total loss right now. We are stuck in a motel in Maui because Dad, poor Isaiah, he is having an episode." She looked at Andre. Andre nodded solemnly. "Yeah," he said, leaning into the frame. "He is confused. He forgot his flight. He locked us out of the bank accounts. We are just trying to get home to get him some help. We are so worried about him. He is just not himself." Jasmine stopped the recording. She watched it back, a satisfied smile creeping onto her face. "It is perfect," she said. "We will make a few more of these. One about how the kids are crying, one about how we tried to call him 50 times. We build a timeline. By the time we get to the courthouse on Monday morning, we will not look like greedy children. We will look like desperate caregivers." Andre took the phone and watched the video again. He saw himself on the screen, looking tired and serious. He almost believed it himself. It was a lie, but it was a useful lie. It was the key to the kingdom. "We are going to take it all," Jasmine whispered, staring out at the dark horizon. "The house, the accounts, the business. We are going to have him declared incompetent, and then we are going to put him in that nice facility in Buckhead. The one with the garden. He will be happy there, and we will finally be free to live our lives without begging for every dime." Andre finished his vodka in one gulp. He crushed the plastic cup in his hand. The sound was loud in the quiet night. "Let us do it," he said. "He is asking for a war. Let us bring him one." The flight back to the mainland was a 12-hour endurance test designed by the devil himself. They were seated in the last row of the economy section right next to the lavatories. The seats did not recline. The air was stagnant and smelled of strong chemical disinfectant mixed with the stale odor of human exhaustion. Every time the bathroom door opened, a waft of something worse drifted over them. Malik and Tiana were miserable. They had cried for the first 2 hours until they finally collapsed into fitful, sweaty sleep, huddled against their parents like refugees. Andre sat in the middle seat, his knees pressed hard against the plastic tray table in front of him. His long legs, which usually stretched out in the ample space of first class, were cramped and aching. He tried to shift his weight, but there was nowhere to go. He closed his eyes, but sleep was impossible. His mind was a racing engine that would not cool down. He replayed the last 3 days in a loop. The decline of the credit card, the look on the concierge's face, the dirty motel room, the humiliation. With every mile they flew away from Hawaii, his anger hardened into something brittle and dangerous. He began to rewrite the history of his relationship with his father. He stripped away the memories of tuition payments and graduation gifts. He erased the years of support. In the dark theater of his mind, he painted a new picture. He saw himself as the victim of a tyrant. Isaiah was not a generous father. He was a controller. He was a man who used money as a leash. And now that Andre had tried to walk on his own, Isaiah was choking him. "It is not fair," Andre thought, the words repeating like a mantra. "It is my inheritance. He is just sitting on it. He is just letting it rot in low-yield bonds while we struggle to maintain the lifestyle we deserve. He convinced himself that he was the smart one. He was the one with the vision. Isaiah was just a carpenter who got lucky with real estate in the 80s. The old man did not understand modern leverage. He did not understand that money needed to move to grow. Taking control of the trust was not theft. It was rescue. It was a necessary intervention to save the family fortune from a man who clearly had lost his mind. Andre pulled his phone out of his pocket. He had paid $30 for the slow, patchy in-flight internet. He needed to make sure his tracks were covered. Jasmine's plan for the conservatorship was brilliant, but it relied on them appearing completely blameless. They had to be the concerned, loving children. They could not have any evidence of premeditation. He unlocked the screen and opened his email app. He scrolled back through his sent folder, searching for a specific date 3 weeks ago. He remembered sending it after a long lunch with his investment buddies, when the vodka had made him feel invincible. There it was. The subject line stared back at him. The Hawaii Old Man Payout Plan. Seeing it now in the dim, harsh light of the airplane cabin, it looked ugly. It looked predatory. He opened it and read the first few lines. Once we get him to the resort relaxed and a few drinks in him, he will be much more agreeable to signing the disbursement papers. The $30K is a steep price, but the payout from the trust will make it all worthwhile. Andre felt a cold sweat prickle on his neck. If a judge saw this, the conservatorship would be dead in the water. This email was a smoking gun. He hit the trash icon. The email vanished from the list. But Andre knew that was not enough. He was tech-savvy enough to know that deleted did not mean gone. He navigated to the trash folder. He found the email again sitting there in digital purgatory. He selected it one more time. He pressed the button that said delete permanently. A warning popped up asking if he was sure. He tapped yes with a thumb that trembled slightly. The screen refreshed. The folder was empty. He let out a long breath he did not know he had been holding. It was gone. No paper trail. No evidence. Just the word of a respectable businessman against the word of a confused, senile old man. He was safe. The plane landed in Atlanta in the gray pre-dawn hours. The airport was quiet, the moving walkways humming in the empty corridors. They collected their luggage from the carousel. The expensive Louis Vuitton bags were scuffed and dirty from the journey, looking as battered as their owners felt. They did not talk much. The exhaustion had moved beyond words into a dull, throbbing headache that they all shared. They walked out to the curb and hailed an Uber XL. The driver, a cheerful man who clearly did not know how to read a room, tried to make small talk about the weather. Jasmine shut him down with a single icy glare. They drove north through the sleeping city. The highway was empty, a river of concrete flowing through the trees. Andre watched the familiar landmarks pass by. The skyline, the exit for the stadium, the turnoff for their neighborhood. With every mile, his confidence began to return. This was his turf. This was his home field. In Hawaii, he was a tourist with a declined card. Here he was, Andre Vance. He had connections. He had a plan. He looked at Jasmine sitting next to him. She was fixing her makeup in the visor mirror, applying fresh lipstick with the precision of a warrior painting on war paint. She caught his eye in the mirror and gave a small, tight nod. They were ready. The car turned onto the street where Isaiah lived. The houses here were old and solid, built with brick and pride. They pulled up to the driveway of the house Andre had grown up in. It stood dark and silent against the lightening sky. The lawn was perfectly manicured. The oak tree in the front yard stood like a sentinel. To a stranger, it looked like a sanctuary. To Andre, it looked like a fortress he was about to storm. The Uber driver unloaded the bags on the driveway. Andre tipped him $5 on the app, a final petty act of a man who felt the world owed him something. The taillights of the car disappeared around the corner, leaving them standing in the silence. Andre took a deep breath of the humid Georgia air. It smelled of pine needles and damp earth. It smelled of the past. He straightened his jacket and smoothed the wrinkles in his shirt. He was not the child anymore. He was the challenger. He walked up the front steps, the wood echoing under his feet. He did not reach for his key. He raised his fist and pounded on the solid oak door. He pounded with the rhythm of a judge's gavel. He pounded with the entitlement of a man who believes he has already won. The pounding stopped, but the echo vibrated in the frame. The door did not open immediately. It took a long, agonizing 10 seconds. Enough time for Andre to raise his fist to hammer on the wood again, his face twisted in a mask of impatience. Then the lock clicked. It was a crisp, mechanical sound. The heavy door swung inward on well-oiled hinges. Andre and Jasmine braced themselves. They expected to see a disheveled old man in pajamas, perhaps looking confused or frail. They had the script ready in their heads. "Poor Dad, you were confused. Come sit down." They were ready to play the role of the saviors. Instead, they saw a man who looked like he was ready for a board meeting. I stood in the entryway wearing pressed charcoal trousers and a fresh white button-down shirt that smelled of starch and sandalwood. My face was shaved close. My eyes were clear and sharp. There was no fog of dementia. There was no trembling in my hands. There was only the steel gaze of a man guarding his castle. Andre was thrown off balance for a split second. He blinked, his mouth opening slightly as if the words he had prepared had suddenly dissolved, but he recovered quickly. He bulldozed past me into the hallway, bringing the smell of stale airplane air and nervous sweat with him. "Dad," he shouted, his voice loud and theatrical. "My God, we have been calling you for 3 days." He spun around, his hands on his hips, trying to fill the space with his presence, trying to make the house feel small and me feel smaller. Jasmine followed him, dragging the children like props in her tragedy. She rushed at me, her hands reaching out to touch my face, but stopping just short when she saw the cold look in my eyes. "Oh, Isaiah," she cried, her voice trembling with a pitch-perfect note of hysteria. "You had us absolutely terrified. We thought something terrible had happened to you. We thought you had fallen. We thought you were dead." They were already building their case. They were speaking loud enough for the neighbors to hear, loud enough to create a memory of their concern. They were performing for an invisible jury. "Look at you," Andre said, shaking his head as if he were looking at a tragedy. "You locked us out of the accounts, Dad. You forgot your own flight. You are clearly not well. We are not mad, we are just scared for you. This is not normal behavior. You are confusing things. You are endangering yourself." I stood with my hand on the doorknob and watched them. It was a fascinating display. It was like watching wolves try to convince a sheep that they were only there to guard the flock. I did not shout back. I did not defend myself. I did not ask them how their trip was. I simply closed the front door and locked it. The click of the deadbolt was a punctuation mark. I turned to face them. "I am perfectly fine, Andre," I said, my voice calm and level. "In fact, I have never been better." They did not hear me. They did not want to hear me. They were too busy pushing their narrative. The narrative of the senile father and the heroic children. Jasmine was already steering the kids toward the kitchen. "Go get some juice, babies," she said, her voice tight. "Mommy and Daddy need to talk to Grandpa." She turned back to me, her face twisting into a mask of pity that barely covered the greed underneath. "We need to sit down, Charles," she said, using my first name, which she only did when she was trying to assert authority. "We need to talk about your future. We cannot let this happen again. We are going to have to make some changes for your own good." They walked into the living room, their steps heavy with entitlement. They were expecting to find the room as they usually left it, a place for them to sprawl out and dominate. They walked past the entryway arch, ready to deliver their ultimatum, ready to tell me that they were taking charge. Andre was already starting his speech. "Dad, we have decided that it is best if we—" He stopped dead. The words died in his throat. The breath left his lungs in a sharp hiss. Jasmine bumped into him and let out a small, startled gasp. They stood frozen in the center of the rug, staring at the armchair by the fireplace. The room was not empty. Sitting in the wingback chair, the one that faced the door, was not a ghost. It was Julian Graves. He was wearing a navy suit that cost more than their entire failed vacation. He sat with one leg crossed over the other, his posture relaxed but alert. His leather briefcase was open on the coffee table in front of him. He held a thick file folder in his hands, and he looked up as they entered with the expression of a predator who has just seen dinner walk into the trap. He did not smile. He did not stand up to greet them. He just closed the folder with a soft, deliberate slap. "Good morning, Andre," Julian said, his voice smooth as polished granite. "We have been waiting for you." The shock in the room was a physical thing, a sudden drop in pressure that made my ears pop. Andre stared at Julian Graves, his face cycling through a spectrum of emotions. Confusion gave way to recognition, and recognition hardened instantly into defensive rage. He knew who Julian was. Everyone in the city with money knew who Julian was. He was the shark you called when you wanted the water to turn red. And seeing him sitting in my living room, looking comfortable and deadly, was a sight that shattered Andre's reality. "Get out," Andre barked, pointing a shaking finger at the door. "I do not know what you are doing here, or what lies my father has told you, but this is a private family matter. You have no right to be in this house. Get out before I call the police." It was a bold bluff, the roar of a paper tiger. Julian did not flinch. He did not even blink. He simply stood up, unfolding his tall frame with a slow, deliberate grace that made Andre take an involuntary step back. Julian was immaculate, a tower of navy wool and quiet power. "Mr. Vance," Julian said, his voice low and resonant, carrying the weight of absolute authority, "I am here at the request of the property owner. You, however, are currently trespassing. I suggest you lower your voice and sit down, unless you would prefer to have this conversation in a holding cell." The threat hung in the air, sharp and cold. Andre looked at me, waiting for me to intervene, waiting for me to protect him from the big bad wolf. I just looked back at him, my face a mask of stone. I sat down in the chair opposite Julian and folded my hands in my lap. Andre looked at Jasmine, then back at Julian. He realized he had no leverage. He sank onto the sofa, his movements stiff and jerky. Jasmine sat next to him, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped bird. She clutched her purse to her chest as if it contained the secrets of the universe. Julian sat back down and opened the file folder on the coffee table. He did not speak immediately. He let the silence stretch, let it become heavy and uncomfortable. He picked up a document, inspected it for a moment, and then slid it across the polished wood of the table. It stopped directly in front of Andre. "Let us begin with the tuition," Julian said, his tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. $20,000 a year for the last 3 years, paid directly from the trust. The records show these were categorized as medical expenses for your father. Andre stared at the paper. It was a bank statement, the relevant line highlighted in neon yellow. "That is a mistake," Andre muttered, not meeting Julian's eyes. "A clerical error. I intended to pay it back." Julian slid another paper across the table. "And the $6,000 for the landscaping at your personal residence," he continued. "Categorized as maintenance for this property. Another clerical error, I assume." Andre's jaw tightened. He said nothing. Julian reached into the folder again. He pulled out a stack of papers, thick and heavy, and the car payments, the club dues, the 5-star dinners. He laid them out one by one, dealing them like tarot cards of ruin. The table was disappearing beneath a mosaic of greed. Then Julian pulled out the final piece. It was a single check, blown up to twice its size. It was a withdrawal slip for $10,000, dated 3 months ago. Julian tapped the signature line with his index finger. "This is the most interesting one," he said. "This withdrawal was made while Isaiah was in recovery from hip surgery. He was sedated. He was physically unable to hold a pen. Yet here is his signature, or rather, a very good simulation of it." The air left the room. Forgery. It was the word that was screaming in everyone's mind, though nobody said it. Andre looked at the signature. He looked at his own handiwork. His face went pale, a waxy gray color that looked like sickness. "That is enough," Andre shouted, slamming his hand down on the table, making the papers jump. "So what? So what if I signed it? I am his son. I am the only heir. It is all going to be mine eventually anyway. I was just accessing my own money a little early. What is the difference if I take it now or in 10 years? He looked at me then, his eyes burning with a twisted sense of righteousness. "You are sitting there judging me," he spat. "But you have been hoarding it. You sit on this pile of money like a dragon, making us beg for scraps. I have a family to support, Dad. I have a lifestyle to maintain. I did what I had to do. It is my birthright." I looked at my son, this stranger in a suit, and felt a profound sadness. He really believed it. He believed the money was his by divine right. I cleared my throat. The sound was soft, but it silenced the room. "It was never yours, Andre," I said quietly. Andre scoffed. "Of course it is mine. You built it for us." "No," I said, leaning forward. "I built it, period. I earned it. I remembered the mornings I woke up before the sun. I remembered the cold biting my fingers on winter job sites. I remembered the smell of sawdust and the ache in my back that never really went away. That money is not just numbers in a bank account," I said, my voice rising just a little. "That money is my sweat. It is my time. It is the cartilage in my knees and the callus on my hands. It is the wood, Andre. It is the years I spent shaping things while you were busy wanting things. You did not earn a splinter of it, and you have no right to steal it." The truth of my words hit him like a physical blow. He flinched, but then his eyes hardened. He looked at Jasmine. They shared a look, a desperate silent communication. They had one card left to play, the nuclear option. Jasmine straightened up, smoothing her wrinkled linen pants. She let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded bordering on hysterical. "Listen to him," she said, turning to Julian, her voice pitching up. "Listen to him, talking about wood and sweat. He is rambling. He is living in the past." She reached into her large designer bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She slammed it onto the table on top of the evidence of their theft. "This is exactly why we are here," she declared, her voice trembling with feigned concern. "We have a petition drafted. We are filing for emergency conservatorship on Monday morning." She looked at me with eyes that were cold and dead. "He is not competent, Mr. Graves. Look at what he has done. He stranded his grandchildren in a motel. He froze his family's assets without warning. He is paranoid. He is vindictive. He is clearly suffering from dementia. We are not here to steal from him. We are here to save him from himself. We have videos. We have documentation. We are going to take control, not because we want to, but because the court will see that we have to." Andre seized the lifeline. He sat up straighter, his confidence returning in a rush. "That is right," he said, nodding vigorously. "You can wave your papers around all you want, but they are just proof of his erratic behavior. No judge is going to let a senile old man starve his own family. You are done, Dad. We are taking over." The room fell silent again. They sat there, breathing hard, convinced they had just played the winning hand. They thought they had checkmated me. They had no idea that Julian Graves was not playing chess. He was the executioner, and he had not even sharpened his blade yet. Julian Graves did not look worried. He did not look impressed. He looked like a man who had just been handed the final piece of a puzzle he had already solved. He reached into his briefcase one last time. His movements were slow and deliberate, almost ritualistic. He did not speak until he had retrieved a single sheet of paper, crisp and white, and placed it on top of the pile of bank statements. He smoothed it out with the palm of his hand. "I am glad you brought up the issue of mental capacity," Julian said, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated in the floorboards. "Because the courts take the mental state of all parties into account, especially when determining intent." He looked at Andre. "You mentioned that your father is confused. You mentioned that your actions were born out of concern, that you were reacting to an emergency." Andre nodded, a drop of sweat rolling down his temple. "That is right," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "We were just reacting." Julian tapped the paper in front of him. "Then perhaps you can explain this," he said. "This is a forensic recovery of an email sent from your personal account to your wife's account. It is dated 3 weeks ago, long before any alleged confusion began." Andre stared at the paper. His eyes went wide, the pupils contracting into pinpricks of terror. He recognized the layout. He recognized the timestamp. "But that is impossible," he whispered, the blood draining from his face until he looked like a corpse. "I deleted that." Julian allowed a small, humorless smile to touch his lips. "Nothing is ever truly deleted, Andre," he said softly. "Not when a court order grants a forensic audit of your digital footprint." He picked up the paper and began to read. He did not read with emotion. He read with the flat, clinical tone of a coroner stating a cause of death. Subject line: "The Hawaii Old Man Payout Plan." Julian paused, letting the title hang in the air like the smell of rot. Jasmine let out a strangled sound, a gasp that died in her throat. Julian continued. "The body of the email reads as follows: Once we get him to the resort, relaxed and a few drinks in him, he will be much more agreeable to signing the disbursement papers. The $30,000 is a steep price, but the payout from the trust will make it all worthwhile. If he balks, we lean on the senility angle. We can probably get a doctor to sign off on a temporary hold if we paint the picture right. Then we put him in the facility and the house is ours." The words fell into the room like stones, heavy, irreversible, damning. There was no way to spin this. There was no way to act their way out of it. This was not the rambling of a concerned son. This was the blueprint of a conspiracy. This was premeditated elder abuse. This was a confession signed and dated before the crime even began. Jasmine slumped back against the sofa cushions, her face devoid of color. She looked at Andre with pure hatred, the hatred of a conspirator whose partner has led them into a trap. "You idiot," she hissed. "You told me you scrubbed everything." Andre could not speak. He sat there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock, gasping for air that suddenly felt too thin to breathe. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone. All that was left was the naked, ugly truth of what he was. I sat there and watched them. I watched the people I had loved, the people I had supported, crumble under the weight of their own greed. I felt a part of me die in that moment, the part of me that remembered teaching Andre to ride a bike, the part of me that had walked Jasmine down the aisle because her own father was gone. That part of me withered and turned to dust, blown away by the cold wind of their betrayal. But in its place, something else rose up, something harder, something necessary. I stood up. My knees did not ache. My back was straight. I looked down at them, these two strangers sitting on my furniture. "That is enough," I said. The volume of my voice was low, but it filled the room completely. "The trial is over. The verdict is in." Andre looked up at me, his eyes wet with tears of panic. "Dad," he stammered, reaching out a hand. "Dad, please. It was just talk. We were just venting. You know, we would never actually hurt you. Please, do not do this." I looked at his outstretched hand, the hand that had forged my signature while I lay in a hospital bed. I did not take it. I stepped back, creating a distance that was infinite. "You are not my son right now, Andre," I said. "You are a liability. You are a thief. And you are a stranger to me." I pointed to the door I had built, the door that had always been open to them. "Get out," I said. Andre blinked. "Dad, get out," I repeated, my voice hardening into iron. "You are trespassing on my property. You have 5 minutes to remove yourselves and your things from my house. If you are still here in 6 minutes, Julian will call the police and have you arrested for fraud and criminal trespass. And given the evidence on this table, I do not think they will be granting you bail." Jasmine stood up first. She did not look at me. She grabbed the children's hands, pulling them up from the floor where they had been playing, oblivious to the destruction of their parents' lives. "Come on," she said, her voice brittle. "We are leaving." Andre sat there for a moment longer, looking at the ruin of his life. He looked at the papers on the table. He looked at Julian, who was watching him with impassive eyes. And finally, he looked at me. He searched my face for a trace of the father he had manipulated for so long. He found only the architect, inspecting a structure that had to be condemned. He stood up. He did not say goodbye. He turned and followed his wife out into the hallway. I heard the front door open. I heard the heavy footsteps on the porch. And then, I heard the door close. It was a soft, final click. The sound of a lock engaging. The sound of a chapter ending. I stood in the silence of my living room, the air slowly clearing of their scent. I looked at Julian. He closed the file folder. "It is done," he said softly. "Yes," I replied, feeling a heavy, profound peace settle over my shoulders. "It is done. 6 months have passed since the door clicked shut. The house is quiet now, but it is a good quiet. It is the silence of a library, not a tomb. I walk through the halls and I do not feel the ghosts of their entitlement anymore. I only feel the solid oak floors beneath my feet. Julian Graves was efficient. The trust was dissolved with surgical precision. The assets were liquidated and moved into the new entity. Andre tried to contest it, of course. He found a lawyer who worked out of a strip mall and filed a motion. It lasted about 10 minutes in front of a judge. When Julian presented the forensic evidence, the email, the forged checks, the judge dismissed the case with prejudice. It was the legal equivalent of a door slamming in his face. I hear through the grapevine, mostly from old friends who run into them, that life looks very different for the Vance family these days. They are living in a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex near the highway. The walls are thin. The carpet is beige and industrial. There is no room for a grand piano or a designer showcase. Andre is working. He got a job in sales at a mid-level logistics firm. He sits in a cubicle. He wears a headset. He answers to a manager who is 10 years younger than him. I imagine it stings. I imagine every time he has to clock in, he feels the weight of the crown he threw away. Jasmine has been busy too. She has been selling things. The Louis Vuitton luggage went first, then the designer handbags. I saw one of her listings online, a blurry photo of a purse on a laminate countertop. The caption read, "Gently used, price to sell." It was a tragedy in 4 words. They are drowning in the debt they created. The credit cards are maxed out and now they have to pay for them with their own money. They are finally learning the lesson I tried to teach them for years. They are learning that a dollar earned weighs more than a dollar given. They are learning the simple, brutal math of survival. I do not take pleasure in their struggle. I am not a sadist. I am a father. But I know that rock bottom is the only solid foundation some people can build on. They are finally standing on their own feet. They are wobbly and they are scared, but they are standing. And that is more than I could ever give them with a checkbook. Back in my workshop, the cherry wood table is finished. It glows with a deep, warm luster. I run my hand over the smooth surface. It took months of sanding and polishing to get down to the good wood to remove the scratches and the stains. But it was worth it. The table is strong again. It is ready to hold weight. And so am I. I drove out to the West End yesterday, where the skeleton of a new building was rising against the blue sky. The air smelled of wet concrete and raw pine, which to me has always been the best smell in the world. It smells like potential. Kendra was standing near the foundation, checking the framing against a set of blueprints. She wore a yellow hard hat that looked a little too big for her, but she wore it with authority. She was pointing something out to the foreman, a man who had been laying brick since before she was born. He was listening to her. That was the thing that made me smile. He was listening not because she was my niece, but because she was right. I walked up to her, my boots crunching on the gravel. She turned and smiled, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "Uncle Isaiah," she said, "what do you think?" I looked at the structure. It was solid. It was honest. It was good. I handed her the blue folder I had been carrying. "It is time for the next phase," I said. She opened it. Inside were the incorporation papers for the Betty Vance Scholarship Fund and a contract for the position of executive director. She read it silently, her eyes moving back and forth across the page. She did not scream. She did not jump up and down. She simply closed the folder and held it tight against her chest like a shield. She understood. I was not handing her a lottery ticket. I was handing her a shovel. I was giving her the means to build something that would outlast us both. "Thank you," she whispered. "I will not let you down." "I know," I said. "You already haven't. As for me, my work here is done. My bags are packed, but they are not Louis Vuitton. They are sturdy leather bags that have traveled many miles. I bought a ticket this morning, not to a resort, not to a beach. I am flying to Accra. I am going to stand on the shores of Ghana and look out at the ocean from the other side. I am going to walk through the castles at Cape Coast. I am going to trace the journey backward to find the beginning of the story. I spent my whole life building houses for other people. Now it is time to find out where my own house came from. I did not do any of this for revenge. I did not do it to be cruel. I did it for the thing you cannot put a price on. I did it for my own self-respect. Because dignity is the one house you must build for yourself, and you must never ever give anyone else the keys." This story was never truly about money. It was about the slow, quiet erosion of respect that can happen when love is not guarded by boundaries. Many of us spend a lifetime trying to build a kingdom for our children, believing that shielding them from struggle is the ultimate act of love. But as Isaiah learned, a house built on a foundation of entitlement will eventually collapse. We cannot mistake financial dependency for a family bond, nor can we buy respect with a checkbook. True legacy is not about the assets you transfer to the next generation, but the work ethic and integrity you transfer into their hearts. If you hand someone the fruit without teaching them how to tend the tree, you are not giving them a gift. You are handing them a curse. If you agreed with Isaiah's decision to protect his dignity, or if you have had to draw a hard line with family yourself, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and follow for more stories about justice and truth.